In the quiet town of Willow Creek, where luxury estates and lavish lifestyles were the norm, Grace and Henry's life seemed like a fairy tale. Henry belonged to one of the wealthiest families in town, a lineage known for their successful businesses and their ability to turn every venture into gold. Grace, on the other hand, came from a modest background. Yet their love transcended those differences, building a life together with their two beautiful children. Grace believed in the sanctity of their vows, certain that their love would withstand any storm that life might throw at them. However, life has a way of testing the strongest bonds. Just as their lives seemed to reach the pinnacle of happiness, Henry was diagnosed with severe kidney failure. The news came as a devastating blow, casting a dark shadow over their once bright future. The doctors suggested a transplant, and to everyone's surprise, it was Grace who turned out to be a compatible donor. The family could afford a donor, no question about it. With their wealth, they could have secured a kidney from anywhere in the world. But Grace chose to be the one to donate. It was an act of pure love, a sacrifice that symbolized her deep commitment to Henry. The surgery was successful, and for a while it seemed like a new chapter of happiness was beginning. Henry was overwhelmed with gratitude, and he promised Grace that he would cherish her forever for her selflessness. True to his word, he spent the next 6 months showering her with gifts, romantic getaways, and grand gestures of affection. Grace felt cherished and appreciated, believing that their relationship had grown stronger after weathering such a difficult ordeal. Her sister Lisa, however, had a different perspective. Lisa never hesitated to share her doubts with Grace. "You shouldn't have done it," she would say. "They could have bought a donor. You didn't need to risk yourself for them." But Grace dismissed these warnings, trusting in Henry's love. She believed that their bond was beyond material wealth, that what she had done for Henry would be the foundation of a deeper connection. But as the months wore on, subtle changes began to creep into their lives. Grace started to feel a nagging sense of unease, even though she couldn't put her finger on why. Henry seemed to become more distant, his affection growing more obligatory than genuine. Grace wondered if the surgery and its aftermath had drained him, or if something else was amiss. Despite her doubts, she continued to love him fiercely, telling herself that love requires patience. The turning point came one rainy afternoon. Grace, exhausted from a long day of errands, slipped on the staircase in their home. The fall was severe, leaving her with a concussion and several broken ribs. Fortunately, Lisa was visiting and immediately rushed her to the hospital. For 3 long days, Grace lay in the hospital bed, the pain in her ribs dwarfed by the ache in her heart. She called Henry repeatedly, leaving voicemails, hoping he would rush to her side as she had to his during his darkest hours. But there was no response. When she finally returned home, she found Henry seated in the living room with his parents and a woman she did not recognize. The air was thick with tension as Grace entered, her steps faltering. She expected Henry to express concern or even guilt for his absence, but instead he barely looked up at her. The woman beside him had an aura of polished confidence, and Grace felt a shiver run through her. "Why didn't you come?" Grace asked, her voice small and frail. Henry shrugged, barely meeting her gaze. "I didn't think it was serious," he said, his tone cold and indifferent. The words struck Grace like a physical blow, leaving her speechless. It was then that his mother, never one for subtlety, stepped forward. "Grace," she began, her voice carrying the weight of years of condescension. "You've done a lot for Henry, and we appreciate that, but it's clear that he needs more than what you can provide, especially in certain aspects of the marriage." She gestured subtly toward the new woman, who offered a tight, insincere smile. "This is Sophia. She'll be staying with us. It's for the best." The room seemed to tilt, and Grace had to steady herself against the doorway. The meaning behind the words became clear. Henry's family had decided to bring in a second wife, one they believed would fulfill his needs better than she could. The revelation shattered the image of the life she thought she had built, leaving her feeling like a stranger in her own home. The days that followed were a blur of pain and confusion. Henry did little to comfort her, leaving her to process this betrayal on her own. Sophia moved into the house, quickly making herself comfortable, and Grace found herself pushed to the margins of a life she once ruled. The love she had given, the kidney she had donated, felt like a cruel irony in the face of such a betrayal. Grace's sadness turned into anger, and her anger soon twisted into a cold, calculating rage. She began to see every interaction with Henry through a new lens, recognizing how little he valued her sacrifice. Slowly, an idea began to form in her mind, one that she knew would take her down a path of no return. If Henry could betray her so easily, perhaps it was time he experienced a taste of that betrayal himself. One evening, she began slipping small doses of medication into Henry's meals, substances that would gradually strain his new kidney. It wasn't enough to raise immediate alarms, but it was enough to bring back his old symptoms, weakening him day by day. Grace watched as he began to suffer, taking a perverse satisfaction in his pain. It was a dark side of herself she had never known existed, but the thought of his suffering seemed to fill the emptiness inside her. Henry's health deteriorated over the next few months, and his family was baffled. They couldn't understand how someone who had received a successful transplant could suddenly relapse. Grace played the role of the concerned wife perfectly, keeping her true intentions hidden behind a mask of worry. Every time Henry looked at her with pained eyes, she forced herself to smile, a bitter reminder of how he had once dismissed her own suffering. However, as Henry's condition worsened, Grace found herself struggling with conflicting emotions. Late at night, when the house was silent, she would lie awake, questioning if revenge was worth the price she was paying. She thought of her children, of the home they had built, and the love that had once been genuine. But then she would remember the coldness in Henry's voice, the way he had chosen another woman while she lay in a hospital bed, and anger would surge back with renewed force. Lisa, ever perceptive, began to notice the shift in Grace's demeanor. One night, she confronted Grace, demanding to know what was going on. Grace, driven by a mixture of guilt and desperation, confessed everything: how she had poisoned Henry's food, how she had wanted him to suffer as she had suffered. Lisa was horrified, urging her to stop before things went too far, before she lost herself completely. In the end, Grace's actions caught up with her. The doctors, suspicious of Henry's rapid decline, conducted a thorough investigation, uncovering the substances in his system. Grace's carefully constructed facade crumbled, and she was arrested for her actions. As she was led away in handcuffs, she caught one last glimpse of Henry, who looked at her with a mixture of shock and betrayal. Grace was sentenced to prison, her life irrevocably altered by the choices she had made. As she sat in her cell, she found herself writing letters to her children, trying to explain the unexplainable. She hoped that one day they would understand, even if they could never forgive her. Henry, weakened and alone, was left to grapple with the aftermath of his own choices. Sophia left shortly after the scandal broke, unwilling to remain entangled in the family's disgrace. His parents, once so proud, now carried the weight of their decisions with a heavy silence. Henry, staring out of the window of their now empty home, realized that in his quest for more, he had lost everything that had truly mattered. In the end, the story of Grace and Henry became a cautionary tale in Willow Creek, a reminder of how quickly love can turn to bitterness, and how the consequences of betrayal can echo far beyond a single lifetime. Grace and Henry, once bound by love and sacrifice, were now bound only by the shattered pieces of what could have been.